Hi everyone. Today we're going to review what blood is, how it contributes to the transportation of gases, and how it flows through the body through the various circuits that make up your cardiovascular system. In the lesson, we'll really have to understand what it is about these red blood cells that allow for the transportation of essential gases like oxygen or essential gases that you got to remove like carbon dioxide. And while doing that lesson, we're going to cover all these vocabulary terms, though the latter terms at the very end we're going to briefly touch on, but not define super well. You're just going to note the location.
So, just a reminder, blood is the main tissue that's being transported in the circulatory. It's blood that's flowing through all those veins and arteries and capillaries, and it's holding the key things that your body needs to transport. So, your blood is a tissue, and if you recall, a tissue is a mix of different cells and other materials that work together to do a job. So, in this case, blood is made of three parts, or actually, it's made of two parts really: liquid, which is plasma, and then the cells themselves. And within those cells, you have different types of cells. So you have red blood cells and you have white blood cells, and something called platelets. Platelets are special part cells, cell parts. So basically, you have cells that kind of break up into little chunks that are used to help clot your blood so that if you get a wound, you don't continuously bleed, it eventually slows down. The plasma itself is the liquid medium, the liquid surrounding all the cells, and that actually is where all the materials, besides gases in your red blood cells, all the materials that your blood is sending around, it's actually usually dissolved in the fluid of your plasma. Okay, so that includes your salts, any hormones, your antibodies, any waste. Those are all actually dissolved in the liquid part of your blood. So this is a picture of blood. So the left side is blood as it appears when you pull it out of the body. The right side is what your blood actually is made of. And what they do is they do something called centrifugation, where they spin your blood so the heaviest stuff drops to the bottom. So you can actually see that the majority of your blood is red blood cells, of the cell part at least. Although a decent amount is plasma, and this little layer here is the white blood cells and platelets. So your white blood cells is actually about 1% of your blood in total. 1 to 5. It depends on if you have an active infection. I think actually 5 is a little high. 1 to 2% of your blood. So that when they say white blood cell count, it's actually a really small percentage of their blood that they're checking when they're checking if you have an active infection. So, oops. One thing I want to point out though is I know some of you, because our class is a little bit older, have donated blood in the past. So some people, what they do is they do something called a plasma donation, and the part that makes you really tired and is hard to recover from is the losing the blood is because you're losing red blood cells. So sometimes what they may ask for is plasma donations, and with plasma donations, they spin your blood, pull out the liquid of your blood, and then take your red blood cells and inject it back into you. It's actually a pretty intense process. But what that means is if someone's like losing fluid really fast, losing liquids in their body really fast, what happens is your veins and arteries deflate. They get that low pressure and then blood doesn't move through as fast. So if you don't have enough blood to donate the person, what they do is they fill up those veins and arteries at least with some plasma to help get that blood to push through your body quicker, even if you don't have as many red blood cells. So that's just why you sometimes donate plasma. Kind of interesting, and just a heads up why they do that. It also allows the person who's donating their plasma to not feel as crappy afterwards because they're not donating their red blood cells. So they do feel crappy because they don't have as much blood volume because they have low blood pressure. But once they have some time to receive fluids, they actually recover much faster. And the reason why that is because it takes some time to make your red blood cells. Generally speaking, your red blood cells get replaced every few months, every 3 to 4 months. So it takes a little bit of time to replenish it, which is why when you donate blood, it takes a few weeks to feel better after you donate like a pint of blood. And a pint of blood represents like I would say 5 to 10% of your blood. Most people, it's closer to 10% of your blood. So anyways, those red blood cells are what makes you feel energetic because they're the things that hold oxygen. So if you lose a lot of your red blood cells really quickly, and so when you donate your blood, you're losing about 10% of your oxygen carrying cells, you feel very tired for at least a week or two. So anyways, your red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. So white blood cells are leukocytes, red blood cells are erythrocytes. Okay? And their main job is to do gas transport, primarily oxygen, though it does also play a big role in helping CO2 move around your body. So they look like little, I would say, caved in donuts. This is sort of like a curved flat discs. So, which is what we call concave. So concave is like dented discs. So that little dent is a concave. Okay? And the reason why they do that shape is it helps them squeeze through the veins, arteries, and capillaries a little bit better. And they actually lack most of the organelles you're expecting, like nuclei and mitochondria. So basically, as soon as they're made, their only job is to hold proteins that help them transport stuff. And eventually they just die off because they don't have the organelles allowing the cells to live forever. So the red marrow in your bones are constantly adding more red blood cells into your body. Okay? And because it lacks so much organelles, it gives it a lot of space to carry as much of the critical proteins needed to hold oxygen and help convert CO2 around so it can move around your body. That blood is actually cleared out by your liver and spleen. So your liver and spleen play a pretty big role in keeping your blood clear of crappy blood cells. So as soon as they're crappy, they get moved out. Your liver does most of it because your liver is one of the biggest organs. So if you do lose your spleen, you still got your liver, but the spleen helps out a decent amount. Okay, so in terms of what's in the red blood cells, most people have heard of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's this big protein that's really critical for holding oxygen. And if there is no oxygen or very little oxygen in your blood, then it can hold CO2 as backup. So oxygen primarily binds to hemoglobin, but if there's not oxygen around, then CO2 can bind to the hemoglobin. Okay, so it looks kind of like this, and it has iron. The iron helps it grab onto the oxygen. Iron's really good at grabbing oxygen. That's why iron, when exposed to air, will rust because oxygen will mix with the iron. So, anyways, in your body, though, one red blood cell will have 250,000 of these molecules to hold oxygen so it can move around your body. That's why if you're anemic, you feel really tired and crappy because you don't have a lot of iron, so you don't have as much working hemoglobin in your red blood cells, so you don't carry as much oxygen. There's also another enzymes in the same red blood cells called carbonic anhydrase. So a lot of people don't realize red blood cells also play a huge role in getting CO2 to move into your blood. Because CO2 is a gas. And you may not know this, but soda bubbles are made of gas. And you know that if you open a can of soda, the gas will eventually leave your soda and it will go flat. So you want CO2 that's being made by your body to mix into your blood so that and stay there long enough to get to your lungs so it can be released. So this enzyme called carbonic anhydrase keeps the CO2 in your blood. The methods is a little bit complicated. It basically, this is hemoglobin. It basically converts the CO2 to a slightly different form called carbonic acid or bicarbonate, which allows it to mix into the plasma. You don't really need to know that in my class, but it's just a heads up. But the big thing here, though, is the red blood cells has an enzyme that lets the CO2 stay in the liquid of your blood. So not on the red blood cell. So the red blood cell mainly carries oxygen. But the red blood cells has machines in it, enzyme machines in it, to help take the CO2 and help it dissolve into your blood liquid so that it stays in the blood liquid and doesn't float away. Okay? So it's a little bit confusing, but I'll try to draw kind of a quick sketch of what that looks like. So this is a picture of a red blood cell, and then the surrounding outside is your plasma. Okay? So let's say this is your red blood cell, and let's say within it, your red blood cell is a protein, the hemoglobin protein. And hemoglobin usually has 4 pieces, so I'm going to just draw it like a 4-piece thing, like a 4-leaf clover. And that thing is going to allow it to grab onto CO2, into oxygen, mainly. So oxygen is going to stick to the hemoglobin. So I'm going to just draw next to hemoglobin the symbol I used in my image. So I highly well, I don't highly suggest. You should draw this picture just so you have like a good visual image of where things go. So oxygen goes and clings onto the red blood cell, and then it'll move around your body, and then when it hits your tissues, it will be released, and then it'll be empty at that point. It can help take CO2 and bring it to the lungs. But it mainly has oxygen on it if there's oxygen in your body. Now, in your anhydrous, though, in your red blood cell is anhydrous, which I'm going to represent by the square. And in that case here, if there's CO2 in your body, that CO2 is going to flow into that machine, and that machine in the red blood cell is going to allow the CO2 to become a special type of CO2. That's not a good way to draw it. Let me try a different way. But it's just basically going to become a special kind of CO2 in plasma. It's just going to allow it to stick around the plasma better so that it doesn't float back into the tissues. So now it's going to stay in the plasma, the river, and allow the river to flow back to the lungs so it can be removed. Okay? And just imagine CO2 is in tissues, and then this region over here is like the artery or vein or capillary. So the key here is we need our blood to transport so that your waste and non-gas materials can flow through the organs. And even if it's deoxygenated or oxygenated, that blood will eventually move through any critical organs you need it to get to, like your liver or your kidneys, to remove waste, because your body pushes blood all throughout everything every minute, in less than a minute, even 45 seconds, basically. So oxygen is key to making sure organs can do their job, though. So in this case, materials, they can flow whatever way, but because the one-way flow is in place, it will eventually flow through whatever critical organ you need it to get to. However, when it comes to oxygen, though, you really need oxygen flow to be constantly coming towards your tissues, and the crappy gas that would block oxygen from getting there, CO2, needs to be constantly removed to get space for oxygen to get there. And the reason why is oxygen is really critical to respiration to get energy. So if you don't have oxygen there, you can't make enough energy to live. So deoxygenated blood, whenever I say that, I'm referring to blood with very low oxygen. And it's high in carbon dioxide. It's often modeled with blue. So your blood actually isn't physically blue. It actually is just darker than normal. But in pictures, people tend to draw it in the color blue. Oxygenated blood is blood that has lots of oxygen inside of it, oxygen touching the hemoglobin. And when hemoglobin holds oxygen, it becomes a lighter pigment. And then people tend to draw it in the pictures as red. Your blood isn't literally blue, but it does have a darker pigmentation when you don't have enough oxygen in your blood. You can kind of see that because when blood leaves your body, it's really bright red, but give it exposure to air and time for oxygen to leave, it kind of turns like this darker color and then eventually brown. Okay, so anyways, just a reminder, and you don't really need to write this down unless you forgot, but in CN39, I'm going to talk about atriums and ventricles quite a bit. Atriums are parts of your heart that receive blood, and ventricles are the motors. So this is the machine of the heart. Whole job is to put the force that actually pushes blood to wherever you need it. Pushes it into the lungs, pushes it into your body. I'm also going to use the term artery and vein quite a bit, at least in today's lecture. I'm going to use all these terms a lot in the next lecture. An artery, just reminding you, means A for away, so it's moving blood away from the heart. And depending on where it's going, this blood doesn't always need to be oxygenated. If it's going to the lungs, it's lacking oxygen. And or at least the lung parts that do oxygen exchange. And vein means going back to the heart, returning to the heart. So in this case, usually veins are carrying deoxygenated blood from the tissues back to the heart, though in one particular case, when blood is going from the heart back to the lungs back to the heart, that's actually oxygenated. And what I'm just referring to right now are different ways blood circulates through your body. So blood's going to circulate either from your heart, that crappy blood that came back from your body is going to leave your heart and go into the lungs to get oxygen and return back to the heart when it has oxygen. That's called a pulmonary circuit because it's going through the lung. When blood that has oxygen leaves your heart and goes through your body tissues and then loses oxygen again and then returns back to the heart, that's what we call, ooh, my pen got sucky, but that's what we call the systemic circuit. Okay? This is another image of that. So when we say things are going to the lungs, we don't actually mean all of your lungs. We mean the part of your lung that does gas exchange, called your alveoli. How the rest of your lung actually needs to stay alive and uses oxygen, actually, so they actually participate in your systemic circuit. But when we say blood, the pulmonary circuit, we're actually saying blood leaving your heart and going to the part of the lung that lets it get oxygen. Okay? But just a heads up. Blue, again, reminding you, represents not having enough oxygen. Red represents having a lot of oxygen. But your blood isn't literally blue. Okay, so let's go over the two circuits. So pulmonary circuits sends deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lung to get oxygen into your blood. Particularly, that part of the lung is the alveoli, but we'll go over that when we go over the lung stuff. So this is entirely powered by the right side of your heart. So the right side of your heart is the part of your heart that receives crappy blood, this side. And its whole job is to shove that blood into your lungs. This part of your heart has the motor, so that part of the heart is responsible for creating the pushing force that's going to force that blood through your lungs and then into the other side of your heart. Okay? When it gets pushed through the lungs, it gets a chance to go through capillaries that will help bring oxygen in. Those capillaries interact with that part of the lungs, the alveoli, that lets oxygen get through the lungs and into the blood. And then once it's oxygenated, still being powered by that one push, that river flow that's being created by the right side of the heart's, the right ventricle, it's going to then have enough force to still return back to the heart, but it's going to go through the left side now, and it's going to re-enter the heart through what's called the pulmonary vein. So when the blood exits the right heart, because the blood is leaving the heart, it's still called an artery. But it's not going just anywhere. It's going to the part of your body that is your lungs, which is pulmonary. So that's why it's called a pulmonary artery. So this is the only artery in your body that carries deoxygenated blood. For the rest of your body, arteries usually carry oxygenated blood because it's sending blood from your heart into your body, which wants oxygen. Now, when the blood returns to your heart, it's going through a vein, which makes it still a vein, even though it's the only vein that has oxygenated blood. All other veins in your body carry deoxygenated blood because they're returning crappy blood to your heart. But in your pulmonary circuit, which is the weird one, you're fixing your blood to get oxygen in. So it's kind of going in reverse of what's normal. Okay? Now you notice the word pulmonary comes up twice because it means lung. Pulmonary is the fancy term for lung. So if you say pulmonary circuit, it means the lung circuit, getting blood into your lungs to get oxygen. Pulmonary embolism, clot, embolism means clot, so it means a clot in your lungs. All right? Pulmonologist is a doctor for your lungs. So just a heads up. And last part of our notes, the systemic circuit is the main thing you think of the heart doing, which is your heart feeding your body oxygenated blood. So it's the part of, its whole job is to get that oxygenated blood that your heart just received from the lungs and shove it into the rest of your body. Okay? So get that oxygenated blood into your tissues. So the left side powers this. So if you think about it, right side or left side, which one's going to be thicker? Which one has to put more force into it? The side pushing blood into the lungs, which are right next to the heart, or the side pushing the blood into your entire body? So if you can't tell, the left side is super thick. 2 C's thick, okay? So, anyways, it's going to take that oxygenated blood and shove it into the rest of your body through that pump, the left ventricle. And then it exits the heart through a big, because there's so much force happening, it goes through this massive, huge, super elastic artery called the aorta. Then eventually it'll filter through smaller arteries and then capillaries, and at that point, then that blood will be delivered into your body tissue. And then once it gets delivered into your tissues, it will re-enter through the capillaries into the venules and then eventually your veins. And once it reaches the veins, it's going to all go back to the heart. And at that point, all your veins kind of merge together into these giant veins called vena cava. So they all kind of go through these like huge merging tubes that re-enter the heart on the right side. And because it's coming into the part of the heart that receives blood is the atrium. So it's entering through the right atrium. So superior vena cava is the huge artery that's above the heart, so it's taking blood that's returning from the organs above your heart back to your heart. So that's veins from your brain, from your neck, stuff like that. And then the inferior vena cava is inferior, so it's bringing blood back from the lower part of your body back to your heart. But they still both merge into the same port and dump it into the right atrium. Okay, so that's basically the pulmonary and systemic circuit. But before we leave, I'm going to just kind of draw a really quick, simplistic sketch of the pulmonary and systemic circuits so you have it in your notes. So please draw this down. Okay, so we start with the blood in your body, and its whole job is it's going to use the O2. And it's also going to create CO2 waste. But anyways, that blood's going to leave the body through the body tissues, through the capillaries and the venues, and eventually go into the vein. And those veins are going to send crappy oxygen blood, high CO2 blood back to your heart. Before it gets into your heart, though, it's going to go through a special tube, your vena cavas, either inferior or superior, depending on where it's coming from the body. At that point, it's going to exit through another tube from your right side of your heart, called your pulmonary arteries, which is going to give it an opportunity to get into your lungs, which is going to give you a chance to get oxygen. At that point, it's going to come back to the left side of your heart. So we're still in the heart, but now on the left side of your heart. Remember, I'm drawing it to your right because this is the patient's left side. If you took this picture and put it on your chest, you would realize it's on the left side. Okay? So my oxygenated blood is going to re-enter my left side through my pulmonary vein, going to get into the atrium, then move down to the ventricle pump. At the ventricle pump, it's going to exit my heart through what's known as my aorta. And at that point, it will go through the body arteries to eventually get to your body. And that high oxygenated blood and low CO2 blood gets back into your body where it can get to your tissues via the capillaries, right? And remember, I'm drawing this in red and blue to represent oxygenated blood versus deoxygenated.
So today we reviewed the role hemoglobin and carbonic anhydrase within the red blood cell helps contribute to the exchange of gases. We also discussed the differences between the systemic circuit as well as the pulmonary circuit and some of the key parts of the heart that contribute to those various circuits. That concludes the lesson. Bye.